AV Shop Talk, Episode 27.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, this is AV Shop Talk, covering the latest trends and emerging technologies in systems integration. This is where the AV pros come to talk shop.
Welcome to the AV Shop Talk podcast. Thank you so much for making AV Shop Talk part of your day as you're either listening on the go, maybe with a mobile device, or on a desktop. You're maybe streaming through a web browser, or you got the show on in the background as you're getting some work done. Thanks for tuning in. So this episode is a fun one. We're going to be talking shop about sound system tuning, and in order to dive deep into this topic, I had Nathan Lively join the conversation. You may recognize his name because he's a fellow podcaster. He has been working on a podcast called Sound Design Live for about 5 years now, and he's really done some great interviews, and he lives and breathes live sound. So it was great to have him on and pick his brain about sound system tuning. This episode is going to be chock full of tips and resources and webinars and books and all kinds of information to get you pointed in the right direction and really dig in deeper to the topic of sound system tuning, because let's face it, there's always things that we don't know, and there's always something new to learn. So even if you've been doing this for a while, it might be good to brush up on it, or if you're like me and you're just trying to dig in deeper and develop that muscle memory so you can just get out to a site and you don't really have to think about it. You can just do what needs to be done to get the system sounding great. That's kind of my perspective. But I did want to get to some important shout outs before we get into the interview. The first shout out I need to mention is Sergio. So Sergio was a first submission to the Bragg board. So he took advantage of a new feature that I have up on the website at avshoptalk.com. You'll see on the menu at the top there, you'll see something called the Bragg board, and this is a way for me to showcase your work. So anyone who listens to the podcast, if you've maybe done an install or you're working on a site and you're particularly proud of the work that you did and you took some photos, it doesn't even have to be recent. It can go back to whenever you had a job that you really proud of. And if you got some photos or video or whatever, you can submit that. And there's instructions. If you click on Bragboard and scroll all the way down to the bottom, I've got submission instructions up there for you. You just have to send an email to me with some basic information, and I'll put some photos up there, and I'll feature you in a future episode and put some photos up there. So Sergio worked on this broadcast studio installation down in Baltimore, Maryland, and I can't go too far into the details because it was a kind of a government related installation, but there's a little write-up there, brief description up on the website, and really thanks Sergio for submitting some photos there about some work that you've done. Definitely an impressive rack that you wired up there. Really nice cable management there. Love to see that. And in addition, Sergio also does some recording on the side. He's got his hands in a lot of different things. I don't know if you're listening to or watching American Idol this season, but there was a girl named Jessica Cabral who was on American Idol this last final season, and Sergio had an opportunity to record with her. So I got a little video posted, a YouTube video there of recording that Sergio did with Jessica Cabral. So that was very cool. Thanks again for submitting an entry to the Bragg board, first ever. I mean, mine doesn't count. I guess I was the first submission, but mine didn't really count. Anyway, that's up there too. So if you want to get featured, just email me, Nate at avshoptalk.com. And again, there's instructions if you click on the brag board and scroll down if you want to get featured there. Moving right along, other news before we get into sound system tuning here. So interesting stories for this month. I made the Infocom newsletter for March, so that was kind of neat. They gave me a little shout out because I passed the CTSD, and they put a little tweet, screenshot of a tweet that I sent out in their monthly newsletter. So shout out to Infocom. Really appreciate the mention there. And also wanted to give a shout out to Craig McCormick over at Commercial Integrator. Thanks for including me in the list of 103 AV tweeps you must follow. So we'll put a link in the show notes there so you can check out some of the most prolific AV tweeps out there that are tweeting about pro audio and video. Once again, thanks, Craig. Definitely some must follow people. I'm honored to be included in the bunch. And let's see, without any further ado, I think we ought to jump into the shop talk. And I do have more shout outs I want to get to, but I'll do that after the interview. So stay tuned. If you've tweeted me, you might be getting a shout out.
AV Shop Talk.
I am pleased to welcome Nathan Lively to the AV Shop Talk podcast, all the way from Oakland, California. Nathan is known for his podcast, Sound Design Live, which currently has about 60 episodes and over 156,000 downloads.
Wow.
Yeah, but you aren't just a podcaster.
I totally screwed up your intro.
No. There's no such thing as a set intro.
Just sounded so impressive.
Well, you've got to chime in when there's something impressive like that. But you do other things too besides being a podcaster. You're a pro audio career coach. You're an author of a book, Sound Design Live, Build Your Career as a Sound Engineer. And most recently, you've launched an interactive pro audio workshop called Seeing Sound. So you've got a lot of things going. And I just want to say thanks for coming on to the podcast to talk about sound system tuning. How are you doing today, Nathan?
Nate, I'm doing great, and I'm waking up my voice. And I'm really glad to be here on AV Shop Talk. And I know you want to talk about system tuning and career coaching and fun stuff like that. But before you do, I totally have to hijack your show because I went over to iTunes when I was preparing for this. And when we started talking, and I said, let me take a look at his show. And no reviews, 0 reviews. So I'm going to do this. Everyone can do this with me. Let's just take 30 seconds, go to iTunes. I'm going to search for AV Shop Talk. That brings up the podcast.
Yep.
Then I put in a 5-star review and I write, Nate is great. And I just hit submit. And now you have your first review.
Oh, that is amazing. See, this is why it's nice to have somebody who's also a podcaster. You know the struggle of trying to get iTunes reviews to get noticed.
Yeah. And honestly, it only happens because I ask people directly, and it's pretty important, though. I mean, when people search for things about audio on iTunes, the things with more ratings are going to come up first, and you have a great show, so I want it to come up first.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and what a nice way to kick off this episode. So what's happening in your world this week in pro audio? You having a busy week or about normal or?
This week is about normal. I do maybe 1 or 2 events a week at this point. So let's see. Today I am at California Academy of Arts, which is a school in San Francisco, and we're doing an event for Stanley Getty, and it is going to be a concert and a fundraiser for the school. And the thing we're struggling with at this event today is that the stage they built for us is super small, and there's this band coming where the lead singer, I've heard, apparently is just a really big person, like a 350-pound person. And we are all kind of really nervous about what's going to happen when the band actually gets there to take the stage. Like the stage monitors are basically falling off of this tiny stage, but everything has to look really pristine and pretty. Everything's white. We carpeted the stage white. So
Wow.
that's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but that's my life.
Wow, so that's interesting. It's fun to hear what's really going on, because you can think of not being in the live events world currently myself. I imagine what you must be going through on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, but it's funny. I would have never imagined that would be something that you're worried about or concerned about, right? But that's real life. That's how things happen. So good luck. Wish you good luck in this event that's coming up. So
Thanks, Nate.
All the best. Now, I did want to share also, before we kick things off into sound system tuning, I wanted to let you know and our listeners know that AV Shop Talk was definitely inspired by you and influenced by your podcast, Sound Design Live. I've been a big fan. I don't know about you. I've been a big fan of podcasts and downloading since about 2007, when I discovered some of my favorite radio programs like Car Talk and This American Life and The Dave Ramsey Show. I realized I could download those for free. And I want to say it was like 2012 or 2013 when my eyes were opened to this world of independent podcasters. So shows not originating on radio, but rather produced independently by people who loved specific fields of interest, like professional audio. So before we get too far into sound system tuning, what motivated you to start a podcast, and where do you draw inspiration from?
So I started my podcast after I drank some coffee and read Gary Vaynerchuk's book called Crush It. And I don't recommend people to necessarily take the same path. Reading that book is a little bit like having a loaded gun and know where to shoot it. And so all of a sudden I had all this energy, like, I need to be like creating media. And so I started the podcast without really any kind of idea of what kind of results I wanted, why I was doing it, who it was going to be for. And, 5 years later, that turned into an important part of my business, one of the most meaningful projects I've ever worked on. But that's how I got started, is that I thought that it would be something that would bring in more work for me as a sound designer.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Now that's it's good to hear people's story and how they got into it. And I've definitely heard of Gary before. He's very popular in the internet marketing world. Heard his name before. Have not read his book. But what kind of coffee do you drink? You drink it black or what?
I do drink it black. So I like a short Americano in the morning. And by short, I just mean it's kind of like just an espresso with water.
Gotcha.
But not giant, maybe like 8 ounce. And then in the afternoon and the rest of the time, I usually like an espresso.
There you go. So there you heard it. So a little bit of coffee and some Gary V,
Important
and
stuff.
Sound Design Live was born. Cool.
That's right.
Now the other little intro question before we kick things off. I have too many intro questions. We should just chit chat this whole time.
Speed it up, nerd.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of editing, too. I can go back and take things out if I want. So I wanted to mention also, I had this experience I went to back on March 8th. I got to attend Dolby Atmos listening session. So Dolby Atmos is a 3D audio or immersive audio standard that's starting to gain momentum in cinema. And I got a chance to listen, it was my first time, to content mixed for Dolby Atmos on an Atmos system at the Boston AES meeting, which was held at the Genelec studio or test lab in Natick, Massachusetts. And so 3 new standards for 3D or immersive audio that I'm aware of are starting to gain some momentum. Dolby Atmos, Auro 3D, and DTS-X. So Nathan, while I got you here, have you had a chance to listen to any of these, or what is your impression of these new types of immersive audio?
I have not. I haven't listened to any of those. I also just did an interview with a guy who produced an album for Aura 3D, and it sounded pretty cool. I like the idea, have not done anything with it. And I think in the area, most of the work that I'm in, we are trying to simplify as much as possible. So we would prefer to not have many more channels if possible. Now, that's not always true. I mean, we want creativity in our sound design, and we would like to do fun things like have, thunder all around us, and we love having multi-channel surround sound for our movies. But in live sound, a lot of the time, we are just basically still struggling to get the vocals to be heard in every seat really well, and to have our presentation be heard by everyone in the room. And so we're still kind of catching up to adding more channels. So I haven't experienced those, but I'm excited about it. I would love to sit in a room and hear the 11.1 systems.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring that up, because I think in cinema it is a different world, and you have more control and you have more flexibility. But when you're doing a live event, I think I can only remember working as a stagehand at one event where I knew that there was some sort of surround sound mix going on, and that was Roger Waters, where they were doing some pretty cool things with some rear channels of audio. And this was at like a large scale amphitheater outside, and that's probably the only time I can remember hearing about somebody doing that in a big, large scale event. And it was a big deal. Everybody was talking about, like, oh, did you hear what these guys are doing? Have you ever done anything like that in your world?
No. I have done the mix workshop from Myers Sound with Buford Jones a couple of times, and he talks about how Pink Floyd did that years ago. I've never heard of anyone doing that since then.
Yeah.
So, no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I didn't attend the show. I just helped like unload the trucks and strike and all that type of stuff. So I didn't actually, I wasn't in the sweet spot, so to speak. So I can't tell you how it sounded, but I know that he was doing that.
And again, the only piece of information I can offer is that at this point, working on events, we hardly ever get enough speakers just to do the coverage for the main system.
Yeah.
So then to have several other sources to worry about that also need to cover the entire audience, I think most people are not working at that level.
Well, good. Well, thanks for sharing your perspective on that.
Sure.
And kind of where things are. So let's dig into sound system tuning. And I personally am looking to dig deeper into this topic. I just got my CTSD certification, so that was like...
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was one of my goals that I've been working towards, and now that I got that, I'm like, okay, I need another goal to keep learning, to keep progressing in the world of pro audio and video. And sound system tuning is something that I don't have the muscle memory for. So I'm not doing this every day. I'm most of the time sitting behind a computer working on AutoCAD drawings or system parts lists or cable pull schedules and stuff like that, which is important work, and I do like it, but it's not the same as tuning a system. So what I want to wrap my head around is some of these core tasks that you need to do in order to get a system really humming and sounding good. So I think I know some of the basics, but this is why I'd like to have you on the show today to kind of dig deeper into this. So listeners to this show, I know, range from commercial integration to residential, some from the studio broadcast and live events worlds, maybe post-production, etc. I think the core elements and physics of sound system tuning should be pretty much the same across the board, perhaps just on different scales. But my question for you, Nathan, is who do you think would benefit most from listening to this conversation we're about to have about sound system tuning?
Probably live sound engineers working in corporate, concert, and theater, because that's been my main experience. So that's the kind of people I'm normally speaking to.
Yeah, and I feel like that's important to point out, too, because there are so many different facets and niches in the world of pro audio and pro video. What we're talking about now is definitely inclined towards live events, live sound, larger scale productions. And not to say the information isn't good and can't translate or cross over, but it is good to just have that perspective. And then now I got a two-part question for you. So let's identify the main sound system tuning tasks given two scenarios here. So one, assuming you have only 5 minutes until showtime, what is the one thing that you would do to tune the system?
So 5 minutes isn't very long, but I would probably still put a mic up next to front of house, probably play some pink noise, and this would give me at least some information that I could use to make any quick adjustments that allow me to start planning for what I can do once the show starts. And when I say put a mic up, I mean get out my measurement system and actually take a quick reading, and then I can at least see something like, oh, maybe the low end, maybe the subs are super loud compared to the rest of the system, and I can dial those down really quickly, or at least I can do something.
Yeah, because I mean, oftentimes we're thrown into situations we're not expecting, and so obviously you'd want to plan for more than 5 minutes. But if you're in that situation like that, I think that's a good to know. Like, what's the one thing you would reach for or do? And then the second part of that is assuming you have like 6 hours, okay. which you're laughing at. So that's clearly never the case, right? To have like 6 hours alone in the room to just tweak.
Not really, but it can get close to that sometimes if you're just the last person there, and you can decide that if you want to stay all night, if you want to keep working on it. Usually you don't want to. Usually you want to go home. Or it's an event where someone was like, hey, we had a lot of problems last time. Please do whatever it takes to make this. But yeah, you're totally right. Usually we have a very small amount of time, so we really have to pack it in. But sure, we could talk about this theoretical 6 hour scenario.
So theoretically, 6 hours. So maybe that's more like. Well, actually, before we even ask the question, what would be a more realistic time? Like 1 hour? Maybe you've got.
So I guess it's all different, Nate. Imagine that you are installing a system for the first time that's going to stay there forever. Now that's a little bit different scenario, and maybe you have a few days to work on that. Most of the people that I work with, most of the people that I talk to, most of the events that I work on, we are just installing for the day for an event. So maybe we come in the day before, we do the event, maybe the event is a few days long, and then we strike. So I'm on a production schedule with everybody else, and during that first usually 1 or 2 days that we have to set the event. So it's more likely that I will have anywhere between 30 minutes if we're in a hurry to a couple of hours to do my focus, my tuning, my optimization.
Okay, no, I think that's good to be realistic. I just threw out 6 hours as just a number to start with, but because I don't know, it's not the world I'm living in currently. So if you had 2 hours to get a system really rocking, what sound system tuning tasks would you do? Do you have like a little short list or a standard operating procedure that you kind of go by?
Okay, so here's the order of operations. Inventory and needs assessment, speaker placement, speaker verification, aim, EQ and level, and then time alignment. And those last three get repeated over and over again. So we set aim, EQ, and level and time alignment for our speaker to speaker in an array, and then the array to the room, and then the array to array, moving piece to piece, stitching the coverage together, kind of like a quilt.
Okay, let me just repeat that back so I make sure I get it. So you got the pink noise that you do first. That was from before. But then,
no, that's only if you have 5 minutes.
That's if you got 5 minutes. You do the pink noise. But if you've got all the time in the world, you would do your inventory and needs assessment, placement, verification, and by verification, just making sure red is wired to positive, black to negative. You've got your polarity correct. Very basic things like that.
Exactly, very basic things like polarity, and the main things are just making sure that sound is coming out of where you expect it to come out of. So the front fills are the front fills, and monitor one is monitor one. So you go through all of your inputs, all of your outputs, because if you have a limited amount of time and you can't do all of the last steps after that, you at least know that you have sound coming in and out of the right places.
Yeah, like you don't want to be, trying to turn down a fader to control the foldback mix, and then the front of house goes down, and you're like, somebody switched some cabling. That could be a big. It sounds like a simple one, but if something like that goes wrong and you're not aware of it up front, big problems down the road. So,
and sound is tough. We can only hear where we are standing with our head and our ears on it, and so if you have one speaker that's too loud over in some region that you can't really hear, and you're just blasting that part of the audience or those few people who are sitting or standing there during the entire event, and you don't know because you're just at your mix position the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So moving along, you've got aim, EQ, and then time alignment that you're repeating over and over again. So EQ and level are kind of grouped together. But so you've got your aim of speakers within an array. So you've got a multi-speaker array, and you're adjusting the aim there. But then you've got multiple arrays around the room, and then delayed towers that you're. So this is the type of thing that I really like to learn more about, because I just don't have the experience doing it. But I remember being at the fireworks in Boston on the 4th of July, and sitting underneath one of these delay towers. This is before, I was in college. I think it was in high school at the time. And the sound guy was like sitting in some shade, just kind of like next to me. And I remember chatting with him about that for the first time, and just kind of realizing how complex some of these large scale audio events can actually be. Are you doing events like this where you've got these big outdoor festivals happening, where you've got like speakers up on the top of cherry pickers and things like that? This is I'm kind of explaining the scene in my memory of this event when I went to the fireworks in Boston one year.
Sure. So I've worked on some big events and some complicated systems, and that still happens. But I don't think people need to get overwhelmed or think that they couldn't work on those kind of events because they're too complicated. You walk into a room and you see a stack of gear, or you see a system all set up, and you think, "Wow, that's really impressive. That seems really complicated." But in reality, when we're working on these things, it's really just as simple as A plus B over and over again. So you start with your main speaker, you measure one thing, and then you move to the next thing, and you stitch those two things together, and then those become your new A, and then you add the next thing, and then those are a new A. So you're just doing A plus B over and over again. I'm working on A, I'm working on B, and you add them together. So if you take a methodical approach and go through the list that I just talked to you about, doing each little section at a time, then that's how you get it done, and it won't make you crazy.
Great. That's great advice for somebody who doesn't know where to start, or they're looking to improve their process. Now, I know each venue will be different and the systems will vary depending on requirements of the event. What system tuning tasks do you typically start with and finish with? Or put another way, so do you have a specific order of operations when you're tuning a system, things that need to be done first? I mean, you've listed things out. Is that also, I mean, I don't want to assume it's necessarily chronological, but perhaps it is. I mean, the same, you do things in the same order?
Yeah, I don't think I did mention that. So yeah, that order that I said is totally important. So for example, you need to have some information about your speakers before you can put them in the right place, right? You need to know some things like maybe how powerful they are and what their coverage angle is. And you need to verify that all of the inputs and outputs are working properly before you can set your aim and splay. And if you time align your system before you do any EQ, then you have to go back and fix everything when you started EQing, because inserting filters will add delay, and that'll mess up the time alignment that you did.
Okay, that's an important one. So to make sure you get your EQ set first, and then do your time alignment after the EQ is set. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that's why, remember, we were just talking about starting with your main speaker and then adding whatever's next to it in the list of order of operations. So, for example, you would do the EQ of your main speaker before you tried to time align, and then move over to your B speaker and do the EQ of that one before you tried to time align them, because then if you do the EQ afterwards, then the time alignment's going to shift a little bit and you won't be aligned anymore.
Gotcha. Great. And I do see this episode of AV Shop Talk as kind of like a very much the basics or an introduction to some of this stuff. And I know there's a lot to cover, and you had a great chat with Bob McCarthy on your podcast about this stuff that goes into some more detail. So if anybody's listening to this wants to dive deeper, definitely head over to Sound Design Live and look up the episode with Bob McCarthy, because I learned a lot from that one too. And I'm just making my way through it as a student of audio and just trying to learn as much as I can. And with that, I was recently chatting with a colleague who recommended Studio 6 Digital, which I found out is exclusively for iOS devices. And unfortunately, I happen to be on the Android platform. But this is something that people really like to talk about, these different apps that you can have on your phone to do some basic measurement and tweaking of systems. Have you ever used Studio 6? And if not, what tools or apps do you use and why?
I have not used Studio 6. I know that they're pretty popular. As far as I know, it's the only iOS app that can do a dual channel FFT. And it's pretty amazing that now you can, on your phone, do a dual channel FFT measurement. Now, the problem with that setup is that if you're going to use the microphone on the phone, then you need to be standing wherever you need to make that measurement. And so imagine you're going to have a cable coming out of your phone that's playing pink noise into the sound system, and then your phone's microphone is measuring the sound wherever you are standing with that phone. So you're tethered in a way. So no, I haven't used it. I've heard it's pretty cool. I'd like to play with it. So what apps I'm using? Not a lot on my phone. The stuff that I'm doing on my phone are usually like calculators. So probably the most important thing I have on my phone is a triangle solver. So I can, if I need to figure out an angle or a distance, and I have 3 other parts of the triangle, so I have an angle and 2 distances of the triangle, then I'll use that to figure out the third distance of the triangle. So let me try to think of a better example. So imagine that I could be standing on the edge of the stage, and then I'll take my laser distance measure. I measure to the front of the seating plane and to the rear of the seating plane. And so now I have 2 measurements and an angle. And then from those 2 measurements, I can figure out the length of the seating plane. And then that's what I'll put into my prediction software. So that's one of the most common apps I use. I can take a look real quick. I have my phone right here.
Sure. And now, while you're looking up over there, I do think Studio 6 has some, like if you have an iPhone and an iPad, I know you mentioned being tethered. I think there's some way you can get the app on like an iPad and an iPhone and still be able to walk around the room untethered. But I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's something like that.
Yeah, so this may be exciting for people. So the newest thing that just came out is SatLive and Smart just came out with their new versions, and both of them have remote clients. So you can have your Smart or your SatLive computer running at front of house, and then you can get out your phone or a tablet or anything else, connect to the same network, and just through a web browser, then be controlling your measurement software.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad you brought that up. I got an email from Rational Acoustics that Smart version 8 was just released. So I haven't gone into the details about what that means, but it's definitely something that's on my radar. I want to learn more about, maybe even do some Smart training at some point.
Okay, so 2 of the apps that I've used pretty regularly, one is Clinometer, and that's a lot of times when I just need to measure the vertical angle. Like I was just mentioning earlier, I might take my laser distance measure to the front, measure to the back. How much angle did my laser distance measure have to go up to measure the rear of the seating plane? And then I'll use that in my calculations. Another one is called Room Scan. And I don't use this a whole lot, but when I need it, it's pretty helpful. Like if I just need to do a quick room layout, I can carry this around. I put my phone on the walls in a bunch of different places, and it'll give me a quick plan view of the room.
Oh, okay. So that's just basic dimensioning tool to just give you dimensions versus anything that has to do with like frequency analyzing, right?
Yeah. So if I want to use my prediction software with that room, I need to know the dimensions, and I can do that really quickly with a laser distance measure. But if it's a little bit more complicated shape, it can be nice to actually see that layout and put more architectural visual aids into the prediction software.
So would you say having a laser measurement tool on site there is a secret to getting a great mix? Am I stretching things a little bit here just for the sake of a podcast?
It's super important. No, I use it all the time. So laser distance measure is very important. I don't know if I want to connect it to, I don't know if I want to say it's the secret to having a great mix. It is definitely a power tool and a really important tool in getting your system set up properly. Yeah, I use it a lot.
Great. No, that's a good tip to have, because like having like measurement tools like that to measure distances and angles isn't something that I would naturally think about when I'm like getting into this stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you, Nate, but that reminds me that there's one tool that I use all the time that makes complete sense to me, and I think when I tell you it's going to make a lot of sense to you, but I never see anybody doing this. So we know that our speakers have specific coverage patterns, for example, like 60, 90 degrees, 80 degrees. So what I started doing last year was carrying these triangle templates with me everywhere I go. And so I can get out my triangle template and my laser. I set the template on top of the speaker and I use my laser, and then I can see where it just helps me visualize the coverage pattern of that speaker. And it's so important to me. I use it all the time now. And people always ask me like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, yeah, crazy, right? But once I tell them, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, it sounds like that would be very helpful in determining like holes in the room where there's just like things are off axis and they're just not, there's maybe a group of seats that just aren't in being picked up. But
yeah, exactly. You want to see if who's being covered, who's not. A lot of times you're trying to get sound off the walls and into the room where the people are. Yeah,
great. Now I've noticed you have conducted a number of webinars and coaching sessions, so you've probably got good visibility on various trends in the pro audio world. Are there any common system tuning myths or misconceptions that you've observed that maybe we should be aware of?
How much time do you have, Nate? There's a lot. Oh man, I would say don't get me started, but you already got me started. So
yeah, let's go there.
Let's talk about a couple of my favorites. So the biggest one that we all have to deal with every day is the simple but widespread myth that sound systems do not need to be tuned. So everyone expects the video tech to focus his projector with a grid, and everyone makes time in the production schedule to focus lights, but audio is often overlooked, and people are even surprised when I suggest that we need time to focus and tune our system. My theory is because audio is invisible and like treated like black magic, that instead of physics, like it should be, that it just kind of gets overlooked. So another one that I run into a lot is that you should tune a sound system with an RTA and a graphic EQ. And it's funny, it's been around for a long time, but still one of the worst ways to do it. So I think when parametric EQs first came out, people were afraid to use them because they weren't sure what kind of curve they were making. You know, it was hard to visualize it. And I think that fear has continued to today because almost every event I work on includes a graphic EQ in the system. And I usually say, okay, what the hell do you want me to do with this box of filters with fixed frequency, fixed bandwidth? How is this going to help me ever? Now, of course, I don't actually say that out loud. I say that in my head, and out loud I say, oh, thank you, and then I just bypass it. Because if there's one thing this industry really teaches you, Nate, it's how to get along and work in a team, right? So we don't say things like that.
Right. And this is this is one of those things I actually picked up from, I think, giving another plug for your chat with Bob McCarthy, is telling somebody something's wrong without making them look bad.
Don't insult the client.
The art of doing that, and I think that is definitely something to be aware of. And I've seen that before too. I've had an experience recently where I bypassed a house EQ, and all of a sudden things sounded 100 times better. And I think some of the systems were installed 20 years ago and just never touched. And it was just, if it's not movable and it's not like coming in and going out and it's just fixed somewhere in a back room or amp closet, I think the tendency is just to let it be. And, oh yeah, somebody tweaked that a long time ago. It must be right. And I think buttons get pushed over time, and it's not even the best situation to start with. So,
yeah, Bob is great. And a lot of his really great stories about fixing problems are really just simplifying. So he'll come in, throw out all this complicated stuff that people came up with, and just really simplify it. And then all of a sudden, the really simple act of making something really coherent, and you can all of a sudden understand what people are saying, then people love them.
Now, I do have a follow-up question for you
Sure.
on the RTA graphic EQ workflow versus an FFT workflow. So, like, why is an FFT better, an FFT analyzer better than an RTA and a graphic EQ? Like, what's different about that workflow?
Sure, it's just higher resolution. So with an FFT, you get a bunch more points of information. And with an RTA, all you can see are 32 bands. So if there's a frequency, if there's something going on between those two bands, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. And very rarely is there ever something going on exactly the band that falls in the RTA and that falls in the graphic EQ. And then not only does it, if you get lucky enough that it just magically falls on one of those bands, it's not going to be the bandwidth that you need to fix that. The graphic EQ is not going to be exactly the bandwidth that you need to fix that problem.
Okay, now is there a huge cost difference between like an RTA and an FFT? Like how much money are we talking about here?
Probably, yes. So, no, definitely there is, and it's hard to generalize. But for example, you can get a free RTA on your phone right now, and to get a dual channel FFT on your phone, you have to pay some money to Studio 6 Digital. So,
and I think that's like in the 600 range. No, wait.
Yeah, probably.
I could be way off on that. I don't know why.
But the software for your computer is so if we're talking about computers, though, you can get a free piece of software called Room EQ Wizard that does dual channel FFT, and that is free. I think I said free a couple times already. Free. Okay, so maybe there isn't a cost difference. Maybe I spoke inaccurately. So it's only recently I discovered that Room EQ Wizard actually does dual channel FFT. So far, no. So
okay,
there's not a big cost difference. Graphic EQs are way more widespread. They are cheaper. I'm not sure exactly why. And so if you want to get parametric EQ, like outboard piece of hardware, yes, it's going to be more expensive, but digital boards are much more widespread. And so at this point, if there's still graphic EQs built into digital boards. I would say don't ask me why, but I know exactly why. We just talked about it. But now you can choose. So to go back and answer your question again, Nate, I would say no. I don't really think there's a cost difference anymore. You can get Room EQ Wizard for free and other pieces of software for cheaply. It's not like you have to pay $10,000 to get a SIM3 system from Meyer Sound. And in most people's boards, they have parametric or graphic EQs that they can choose between. So just make a different choice, I guess. Yeah,
no, but that's good to be aware for people that are just starting out, looking to dig into this. Just the cost differences and the benefits of going with FFT dual channel versus an RTA, which there might be information on the web or more access to that type of to an RTA setup. But it's just good to flush out the differences there and try to, as I continue to wrap my head around this. So let's.
Oh, Nate.
Yeah.
I thought of one more myth that is really one of my favorites that I think it would be fun to share.
Let's do it. What's up?
So I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I recently in a training, someone said to me, if it's under 50 feet, we don't need delay. And what they meant by that was if we have speaker A and speaker B and they are less than 50 feet apart, then to use them both in the same system and for them to be coherent, we don't need delay. Like that's a limit. If it's above 50 feet, yes, then we're gonna have to worry about delay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
So yes. That's the scenario. And I totally get it, but I'm going to tell you why it's totally not true. Because there's some training literature out there that says that echoes start at 60 milliseconds. So I think that's where people get this idea. And I remember in my studio recording class when I was in college, we learned that the ear starts to hear an echo at 10 milliseconds of delay. But for live sound and stitching systems together, None of that is true. So if you approach your system design with that idea, I think you'll be disappointed, because if you have, for example, just 1 millisecond of delay between two sources, so imagine two speakers that are a foot apart, or a reflection that comes off of a wall that ends up being a foot of delay, you'll have comb filtering all the way down to 500 hertz. And if you get 10 milliseconds away, it would go all the way down to 50 hertz. So sure, if you're under 50 feet, we don't need delay, as long as you don't mind your frequency response looking like the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay. No, that's definitely a good one to talk about. Now, my experience with delay and everything. Well, first of all, that when you said this, the first thing that came to mind was, okay, sound does travel at a specific speed. At sea level, right? 1,130 feet per second, or I think 332 meters per second at sea level, right? So there's atmospheric conditions, pressure conditions that can change things, but this is where I really like the science part of it. Is that for close proximity things like in a studio or on a stage, the rule of thumb that I've always worked on is that you get about a millisecond per foot is what it kind of boils down to in most situations.
Yeah, that's usable. We use that.
Yeah, okay, good, because I've heard that before and used that a lot. So that's definitely good to know. And the other thing is that you've got to make sure you're delaying the right thing too. And this is important to wrap your head around. If you've got, a main speaker, and then you've got a delayed speaker that's, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology. You've got a secondary speaker that is behind it for some reason. You've got to give the sound enough time to catch up to the main one. So you've actually got to delay the closer speaker so that the sound is going at the same time. Is that you agree with that? Am I speaking clearly?
Yeah. Well, anytime you have two sources that are coherent, that is, they're playing the same thing, and if you have one spot that's being covered by both of those sources, and we call that a lot of times the spatial crossover region, where one speaker is handing off coverage to the next speaker, then yeah, those need to arrive in time.
So what was that term again? Spatial
crossovers. So we have spectral crossovers, where we're actually dividing the frequency band and sending like maybe the low end to our subs and everything else to our mains. And then we have a spatial crossover where we have two sources aligning in time. And a lot of times you can imagine that to be like your main speaker and your delay speaker.
Yeah, maybe like front fills or something that are trying to get
exactly.
like the front row, like all the way out to the left or all the way out to the right, that are just outside of like the sweet spot. Yeah, I can definitely envision that. All right, great. Well, let's get to maybe one last question here to like wrap this up. I know we could talk for a long time, but I do want to be respectful of your time and make sure you can get on with your day here. So let's say somebody wants to become an expert in sound system tuning. I'm familiar with a few different training programs. I know we've mentioned Smart so far. I think we've mentioned the Meyer Sound. They've got a bunch of seminars, I think. But can you give us, maybe some training opportunities that you're aware of that maybe I'm not aware of, or other people listening might not be aware of, that exist for folks who want to dig deeper into sound system tuning?
Sure. So you mentioned Smart, and that company is called Rational Acoustics, and they have their own trainings that they do in person. I haven't taken one, but everyone that I've talked to has loved it. People should definitely check out the free training materials they can get from Meyer Sound. There's a whole library of free archived webinars that are all excellent. Everyone should read Bob McCarthy's book, Sound System Optimization, which you can get from bobmccarthy.com. If you are in Europe, Merlin Van Veen is doing some great seminars there, which you can learn more about on his website, merlinvanveen.nl. And I know that's kind of a funny word. If you have never heard that name before, especially because he spells his name with a J. But hopefully Nate will put a link to this in the show notes. And then a couple more. So another good online resource is Soul Sound. So they have a growing collection of high quality training videos for live and studio engineers. A little bit like a Lydia, if you're familiar with that collection of training videos. So that's Soul Sound. And they have, I think you can do like 1 month free where you can check out all their videos, and then it's a monthly fee after that. And of course, I'll give my own stuff a plug. So I have a course called Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound. It's an 8-week online training course with the specific goal to quickly and effectively maximize sound system tuning in any room. You can sign up for it at sounddesignlive.com. But Nate, I feel like some of this might be a little overwhelming for people who are just hearing about some of these concepts for the first time. So if you want to just get started and just get your feet wet and see what it's all about, then just head over to sounddesignlive.com. The very first thing you'll see on the homepage is an offer to sign up for my free e-course, Intro to Sound System Tuning. So if you're not quite ready to plunge into an 8-week training program, that would be a good way to start.
Great. Well, thank you for giving us multiple kind of entry points there for further continued training. I know there's more than what we've listed here. I know there's a program called EASE for acoustic simulation that maybe more integrators and engineers use, but that is getting even deeper in it. There's also SynodCon that I'm aware of, but the training program that you've offered too, I think is a good entry point just to give people a taste of what's out there and what's possible. So anyway, thanks for bringing that opportunity to listeners of the podcast, and thanks for taking some time to join us.
Oh, it was great, Nate. Thanks for having me.
Well, that puts this episode of AV Shop Talk in the books. Thank you so much for listening. As promised, I wanted to get to a couple more shout outs before we end this episode. First one goes to Lindsay Adler, editor for Systems Contractor News. Her content can be found at avnetwork.com. Thanks for subscribing to the monthly email, Lindsay. If anyone would like to hear their name and website mentioned, you can head over to avshoptalk.com/email and go ahead and fill out the form there, and then listen for your shout out in a future episode. It's just another way to get more people involved, get your name mentioned, and for also for me to build my email list. So if that sounds like a good deal, appreciate you signing up for the email. Next shout out is from Twitter. This one goes to Neville Bound. So Neville says, at Jason Griffin, don't be a stranger. Great contributions to AV Shop Talk. Thank you, sir. And Nev, couldn't agree more. Really, Jason really helped the show take off, and he's always welcome back as a guest. So definitely he will be sorely missed here. Next Twitter shout out goes to Barry Sato. He writes #AV, #podcasts at Rave Pubs Radio, at AV Week Pod, at AV Shop Talk, at HT Geek Scott, at TD Albright, at AV Nation TV. So he is mentioning all kinds of pro AV podcasts, and I am honored to be included there, to have AV Shop Talk included in the mix there. Barry, thanks for listening to us. We hear you, and we really appreciate the shout out. And that will do it for this episode. We'll talk shop with you in the next episode of AV Shop Talk. The AV Shop Talk podcast is produced independently by me, Nate Schneider. Musical contributions have been provided by Colin Owens. Voiceover contributions have been provided by John Perry. If you would like more information and complete show notes about the episode you just heard, head over to avshoptalk.com/episode 27.